Welcome to the Quotive Corner. Today's quote is short enough to fit on a post-it note and deep enough to mull over for a lifetime. It comes from a philosopher most people associate with existential dread and impenetrable academic prose. And yet this particular line is one of the most practically useful observations about human behavior I've ever encountered. If anyone on the verge of action should judge himself according to the outcome, he would never begin. That's Søren Kierkegaard from the book Fear and Trembling, published in 1843. Kierkegaard was a Danish philosopher and theologian, widely considered the father of existentialism, who wrote extensively on faith, anxiety, selfhood, and what it actually means to make a genuine choice under conditions of radical uncertainty. Fear and Trembling is built around one of the most extreme examples of that uncertainty imaginable, Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac. The book asks what it means to act when you cannot rationally justify the action, when the outcome is unknowable, and when even the morality of what you're doing is impossible to verify in advance. This line emerges directly from that territory. So, the quote, it identifies something specific, something quiet, and something that is responsible for an enormous amount of human paralysis that never gets named for what it actually is. The trap is this: conditioning your willingness to begin on your ability to predict or guarantee the outcome. It sounds reasonable when you first describe it. Of course you'd want to know how something ends before you commit to it. Of course you'd factor in the likelihood of success before you start. That's not recklessness, that's just prudence. And to some degree, yes, outcome awareness is part of good decision-making, but Kierkegaard is pointing at something more specific and more corrosive than ordinary caution. He's describing the person who won't begin until they know, not just until they have a reasonable sense of the probability, but until they actually know, until the outcome is sufficiently certain to feel safe. And here's the problem. That threshold is essentially unreachable. Almost nothing that matters in a human life comes with a guaranteed outcome. The job might not work out, the relationship might not last, the business might fail, the creative project might never find its audience, the hard conversation might go badly, the leap might not land the way you hoped. These are not hypothetical risks. They're the real conditions under which every meaningful decision gets made. And if the requirement for beginning is certainty about the ending, the requirement is a trap. It's a standard designed, whether consciously or not, to prevent you from ever having to find out. What Kierkegaard is naming is a specific kind of self-judgment, evaluating whether you are right to act based on how the action turns out. That sounds fair on the surface. Surely results matter. But it's actually a fundamentally confused way to evaluate decisions, because you're holding the present choice to a future standard that didn't exist at the time you had to choose. You can only decide with the information available now. The outcome belongs to later, using later to judge now, and more specifically, using the fear of a bad later to prevent any now, is the trap. It shows up everywhere. The person who has been meaning to change careers for 5 years but can't bring themselves to move because they can't be sure the new path will work. The writer with a half-finished manuscript that never gets completed because they can't know in advance whether it's good enough. The person who has needed to have a difficult conversation for months but keeps waiting for the moment when they can be sure it will go well. The entrepreneur with a genuinely good idea who keeps refining the business plan long past the point where refinement is useful because launching would mean finding out. In every case, the paralysis isn't really about the outcome. It's about the judgment that would follow a bad outcome, specifically the self-judgment. If I start and it fails, what does that say about me? That's the real question underneath the hesitation, and Kierkegaard's observation cuts straight to it. If you're judging yourself by the outcome before you've even begun, you've already made the outcome the measure of your worth, which means you have too much personally riding on a result you can't control, which means you can't afford to start, which means you never do. The way out of the trap isn't to stop caring about outcomes. It's to separate the quality of the decision from the quality of the result. A good decision, made thoughtfully, with the best available information, with honest assessment of what's known and what isn't, can still produce a bad outcome. That doesn't make it a bad decision. A bad decision can produce a lucky outcome. That doesn't make it a good one. Outcomes are partly determined by factors entirely outside your control. The decision is yours. Those are separable things, and conflating them is exactly the error Kierkegaard is identifying. Abraham, in Kierkegaard's framing, could not know how the story ended before he had to act. He had no guarantee. He had no preview of the outcome. He had only the moment of decision, the information available in that moment, and the willingness to move forward into genuine uncertainty. That willingness, not the outcome itself, is what Kierkegaard treats as a thing worth examining. The courage isn't in the result, it's in the beginning. And this reframe changes something practical about how you relate to your own hesitation. The question isn't whether you can guarantee how this will end. You can't. Nobody can. The question is whether the decision is sound given what you actually know right now, and whether what's holding you back is honest caution or the specific trap of requiring a certainty that was never on offer. Now, the honest counterpoint, because this show doesn't skip it. Outcome awareness is not the enemy. Some hesitation is well-founded, not trapped. The surgeon who pauses before an irreversible procedure to review the risks one more time isn't suffering from Kierkegaard's paralysis. They're exercising appropriate care. The parent making a major decision with lifelong consequences for their child should weigh outcomes carefully. The investor putting their family's savings into something should not dismiss outcome probability as an obstacle to boldness. There are genuinely high-stakes situations where more deliberation, more information gathering, and more outcome sensitivity is exactly right. What Kierkegaard is targeting isn't careful deliberation. It's the specific, often unconscious habit of making guaranteed success the precondition for beginning at all, which effectively means never beginning, because guaranteed success is almost never available for anything worth doing. That's the failure mode, not prudence, not caution, the requirement for certainty that doesn't exist. Most of the things people most regret not doing in their lives were not held back by reasonable caution. They were held back by this, by the inability to begin without knowing the ending, by the judgment already waiting in the wings for the bad outcome that might or might not come, by the trap Kierkegaard named in 1843 that shows up quietly in virtually every human life that ever waited too long for the right moment that never quite arrived. The right moment is rarely certain. It's usually just now. Thanks for spending a few minutes here at the Quotive Corner. If this one made you think of something you've been waiting to begin until you knew how it would end, that's the episode working exactly the way it's supposed to. And consider this, wisdom isn't in the quote, it's in the reflection. I'll see you in the next one.